This is Matthias Lugberg. I'm at the MVP Summit today. And with me I have Kent Weare on the product team, as you all know. I want to take the opportunity to talk to Kent a little bit, because being here shows off how fast things are moving right now. And well, we will not be able to talk NDA stuff, but I'm interested to hear Kent's thoughts a little bit about the trends and what's happening, and hopefully he can give all of us some tips.
Yeah, sounds good.
That's good. So, if you would describe the current trends that's going on, what would you say?
Yeah, so there's definitely a big momentum behind coding agents, and that naturally comes in a few flavors. Probably a lot of people are familiar with Claude Code. They made some big splashes, right around the holiday season, and then I would argue that GitHub Copilot has made some very big splashes as well recently. And so I'm seeing a lot of things happening in those areas. Me, myself, I've been focused more on the GitHub Copilot side of things, and it's really just opened my eyes to a whole new world. And it's been super fun, super interesting, what you can do with those things. And I think that's, the biggest thing that's going on lately.
Yeah, it's cool actually. We see a lot of cool stuff. That I'm gonna say, at least we do that. And you say agentic, and the agents are building, and that gives us as an integration developer some opportunities as well, right?
I think it gives everyone opportunities, but yeah, like their integration, and I think there's a few different lenses to look at this through. So there's, I think, obviously from a dev tooling perspective, what does this mean? I think there's from sort of a runtime perspective, like that creates opportunities, like when you host these things and these are actually running, say, autonomously or through conversations, that gets kind of interesting. And then I also think operations is a huge opportunity too. And so sometimes people think, oh, the term coding agent means I'm just like vibe coding, I'm just writing software, but don't sleep on the use cases of operations, because you can find a lot of really interesting, opportunities with these tools.
That's nice, and that's building them in daylight, right? That's one thing, and also using them.
Yeah.
So building them, what would be the most important part for building?
Okay. I love this. So sometimes people think, and I think historically this is probably where people have fallen into a trap, where it's like, I've tried these AI tools, they don't work, they hallucinate, they're a waste of time, and that was probably in the fall, and someone probably used ChatGPT online in a web browser, and like that's not what we're talking about here. So what it means is getting into a terminal session, and that could be like in VS Code or even like just in PowerShell. And the first thing you do, and I'm speaking from a Copilot perspective, GitHub Copilot perspective, is you hit Shift Tab, and Shift Tab turns into planning mode. And so what it is, you're not sort of vibe coding where you're randomly spewing out thoughts, and this, the agent is trying to keep up with you and sort of like just focus on like, hey, I'm just going to write a bunch of code. Whether it makes sense or not, who cares, right? Like that's not what we're talking about here. It's more about what you would do if you were writing code yourself. Like you would probably sit down, you might sketch on a whiteboard and kind of think, oh, these are the different components and these are the things you like whiteboards. Like, you're going to think through a design. That's kind of what planning mode is, where you do the same thing, where you talk about what are your goals, and in return, these coding agents will start to prompt you for inputs. Like, well, like what authentication do you want to use? Like, will this happen or this happen? And it's going to ask you for more context. And so you go through this planning session, and at the end of this is you have like a spec. And so sometimes you might have heard of something called spec-driven development, where that becomes your source of truth. And that's super valuable from many perspectives. Number one is you've kind of built a plan, and now it's easier for a coding agent to digest that and go execute the plan. But it also gives you this point in time where you can refer back to this. So these things called sessions, I get in, I'm conversing with GitHub Copilot, I then go to sleep, I close down my laptop, I whatever, go work out, I come back, and how do you pick things up? Well, that spec becomes an artifact that you can actually use to refer back to. So a couple weeks from now, when you say, oh, I want to make some changes, the first thing you do is say, hey, go review the spec that we worked on together. And it'll go, whoop, now I understand what we've built, now let's proceed. And there's this other thing called sessions, which also play a role here too, where it does have this notion of memory, but having that spec becomes quite interesting as you think about, building solutions. So it's not just about randomly throwing out prompts and having it guess code. It's really more methodically working through these things. Then once you have a plan, you can hit Shift Tab again, and you can even get into autopilot mode, where it now will then go ahead and just write code based upon your plan. And there's an interactive mode as well, where it could then do more of like, hey, do you give me permission to go execute this command? Maybe it's PowerShell or things like that, or search the web because it wants to look up information. You kind of have some choices from that perspective.
So you can start easily.
Yeah.
You don't have to go full autopilot. You can
No, and you shouldn't. You should plan. You should always plan. And then autopilot's okay. But sometimes autopilot, it's almost like you've given it permission not to ask for feedback. So sometimes it'll go do things you don't want it to do. And that's kind of a byproduct of that. So you control that. Like sometimes people think, oh, just the AI is just going to run away train. It's going to do what it wants. But you're in control. So if you enable that, well, that's more your problem than its problem. So
true.
Yeah.
But I hear one interesting thing: plan. So strategy becomes more important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because and you as a developer who kind of maybe feels like I'm losing control, my value might be slipping because like this code generation is being democratized. Well, this is your bit. Like this is the piece you own, is the plan and the architecture. And it's really for you to drive what that should look like, not the agent.
That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
It gives I will add something else. It gives also power to experiment more, experiment, like try new things.
True, and I think it also gives you kind of these almost like rollback points too, where you can also like, hey, at a point in time, like maybe you do experiment, and then it's like, well, like let's reset, let's go back to the plan. And so that's another good thing, right? So you could go ahead, here's our plan, and then it might come back, well, there's a couple ways we can solve this. And then so you could be like, okay, like let's plan a couple experiments. And then you could create like experiment 1.markdown, experiment 2.markdown, and you basically go ahead and document what you've done, and then you can refer back to say, hey, you know what, like this isn't working or this one's working better, let's go forward with this plan, and then get it to document why. So this is another thing people I think lose sight of, is that you could get into this situation where you're running into, say, a technical problem, and you and the agent are working together to solve this. And once you solve it, you don't be like, whew, like that sucked, right? What you say is document what we just learned.
Yeah.
And then put that in like a lessons learned folder, and then you can refer back to it. Like if you need to run into this again, or maybe you have another project where you're going to run into the same situation, or even your teammates, right? Then it's more of like you share that. So we as a PM team, we will share these types of like lessons learned documents when there's, because everything's changing so fast and dependency management can be a challenge. So we will share these documents, and it's like, hey, you're going to go build your own Codeful agent. Like here's my lessons learned, go use it. And that should save you some grief and some tokens at the end of the day. This is all burning tokens. So that's another important thing to think about too.
That's really good. And if there would be a tip to the audience, what would be the thing you would do tomorrow or in the near future?
So I think experiment. Like even if I rewind the clock, this is back to the fall. It was actually right around this where it was like wanting to explore, there was more and more of these kind of vibe coding things that were emerging. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I don't want to deal with dependencies. Like, I don't want to install a bunch of software. I don't want to like do a bunch of trial and error with this stuff. And so I went down the path of like one of those SaaS, I won't mention names, but one of those SaaS providers. And it was kind of cool. It was an interesting experiment. I started to kind of build this web app, just kind of a hobby thing. And I was like, oh, like this is pretty cool. But I found like I started to run into constraints. And, I think that's kind of by design. Like they are building abstractions on top of abstractions. And what I didn't realize was actually, especially now, maybe things weren't as good back then, but now I would never consider going down that path, because what these agents are really good at is actually dependency management. Now, it may not always get it the first time, but it will sort of work through those problems where it's like, you know what, I don't have to go install these things. I just tell Copilot to go install it, and it'll go figure out what's the right version, and it will then manage that for me. And it's like, yeah, this looks good. Thumbs up, like, let's go. So it's one of those things where you always kind of feel like you need to drive the agent, but it's completely okay for you to ask the agent how for help or how to best help itself from like sometimes it'll get stuck on something like, hey, how can I help you with this, right? And
Yep.
and maybe it's like, you know, pointing at a specific GitHub repo, or maybe it's pointing at like the Microsoft Learn MCP server or whatever, and you kind of have to find ways to help it as well. But it is very good at those dependency management stuff, and it's not as intimidating as it sounds. It is one of those things where it's pretty simple to install GitHub Copilot. There is a free version with like limited entitlement, but it is one of those things where even the plans are relatively cheap to get started, and you know, VS Code's free, and so go start this and try it and experiment a little bit, and yeah, I think it'll blow your mind.
Yeah, I can definitely sign up for that, and I will encourage you to do it because it's awesome and it's fun. And I would say, if you look back time-wise, Kent was mentioning, when we talk here, it's a lot about December, which is a big milestone, I would say, in changes. So if you tried stuff before that, give it another shot as well.
Absolutely, yeah, it's changed so much, and even how we work as a product group has changed so much, even since the holiday break. So it is wild.
It's wild, yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Kent, and thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a nice day.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thanks.